Hello and welcome to the Project in a Box video. This is an exploration of the resourcing content and capability within Project in a Box multi-user platform. This video will start off with a set of slides and then take you on into actually looking through that as a worked example. If you're just interested in the slides itself, by all means watch the first part and don't carry on for the second, or use the card up in the corner here top right to go and see that shorter intro video instead. So you will have a plan for your project. You might have multiple plans in one project even, but for different projects. You can use planner files, you can use Microsoft project files, you can use Excel if you want to. And what the system's going to do is take the raw data out of that and turn it into resource demand histograms for you. So you can see what the level of demand is for differing resources across your projects, etc., programs, portfolios, all those different levels of analysis, what the demand is at particular points in time for those resources. That's the basic idea. How that works, let's just unpick that a little bit. So we've got plans, maybe more than one plan on each project, but usually at least one plan. And in those plans you'll have tasks, and those tasks will have resource allocations against them. Not necessarily all of them, but many of them. And it'll have, say that I'm working on a task for 50% of the time. It might start on a certain date and end on a certain date. And it's going to take that information and use it. How it gets that information is that the plan is held as a file within the project. The person who has permissions and ownership of that file can check it out, make some changes. So if it was Microsoft project file, they'd check it out, make changes in Microsoft project, check the file back in. If it was planner, they'd check it out, make changes in planner, check the file back in. That file will then have its data read into the database if it meets a certain condition, and that is that it must be listed as an active resource file for this project. So we have a list of project control files that we read every time they're updated. These could be plans, they can also be risks and issues as well, and any data read out of those will be put into the database. So it knows when you check a file and it just checks to see if it's on that list. If it is, it gets every task out of the plan and puts it in the database, puts a copy of it into the database. So that database then contains the latest version of every task from every project across the entire system. And we need to make that available for analysis in various different ways. We put that through a filter first though. So the first thing we do is we look to see if the resource names on those tasks match users in the system. And we have a lookup list for doing that. So on one project, somebody might ask for M West for 50% of the time. Another project, they might ask for Malcolm West for 50% of the time, or 75% of the time on a different task, etc. But they might refer to me as different things. Now, this lookup list allows all those different resource names to be pointed at the same user in the system. So when I go in the system and look for my task list or my resource chart, it'll show me the data from all of those different projects, picking up all those different pseudonyms that I'm being referred to as. So that's really quite a neat system for pulling all that stuff through and pointing it at the right end user in the system. And you can see that data as a resource chart like this, but you can also see it as a task list if you want to. Both are equally useful depending on what aspect of resourcing you're working on. So we can do analysis with this. That can be done at the individual level. I can see all the demand for me, as can another colleague for themselves. We can see all demand across a project. If you're the project manager, you can see that information. Or at a portfolio level or a program level, that is across a particular collection of projects. And you can also do this where there's a match to role characteristics. So a resource manager can go in and say, I'd like to see all the demand for project managers in the UK. And everybody who's got a role characteristics of being both a project manager and being based in the UK, it will return all the data for that group. So you can see that particular group. And that's a really useful thing to be able to do when you're going in and working out what a combined picture is across a group of people. You can then make that data available to other people, sharing your insight. That can be live analysis, that we can go away and filter and get a particular set of data you're interested in. You can hover for further information. You can get data extract, you can get the raw data, you can get the charts, etc. Out as images to go and use elsewhere, or drop into reports, or send by email, etc. So that's immediately available to you. You can also run it into reports. So here we've got a program report, and you're merging it alongside other information like overdue tasks and change information and costs and risks and issues and benefits and all the normal sorts of stuff. So merging in to get a holistic picture of a project or program or portfolio or something like that. And you can also run it into live dashboards, which are essentially a bit more like reporting, but you can jump around in real time between different areas, different programs and portfolios and projects to see the latest information for those. Okay, so that's roughly how it works. Let's go away and look at that in some detail. So I've got my system here. I'm in a project. It's the CRM project. As I say, we have a lookup list which tells me as the project manager where the sources of data for tasks are. So we can just cross-reference that. Here's the task. It's coming from a planner file. It's actually the source of risks and issues as well, as we often do on smaller projects, rather than having 3 different separate files. Of course, if it was a Microsoft project file, it would say project schedule, file reference number, and it's a Microsoft project source of tasks. And obviously you can see there's a space here. You can have as multiple sources if you want to of the same type of information feeding into the database. So let's go and find that file in the system. It's here. So I've got a whole load of different files. Some are being worked on, some are not. I can take my plan and I can check it out. It opens in Planner. If it's a Microsoft Project file, it would have opened in Microsoft Project, of course. And I can see my plan information. I was running a view which was looking at actuals and cost information here. We're not particularly interested in that at the moment. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new task in, allocate it to me, and we'll see it appear on my task list and in my resource demand profile. So let's go and do that. I'm going to add a new item. We're going to call it Malk's new resource task, and we're going to have it starting after the last task, which is training. So after training, we're going to run it for 100 days. That should be nice and easy to spot. And then we're going to set some resources up. I'm going to put myself on that task, and I'm going to allocate myself for 75% of the time. So that's going to equate to 600 hours, and we know the costs and all that sort of stuff. That's all worked out for us. So create and close. We can see that task showing here now. And I'm allocated to it, and that's feeding in. We can see here's my resource allocation. So some tasks I might be allocated to alongside other people, some I'm not. Typical sort of model. Often people aren't allocated against milestones, for example, or against summary groups. So it's a fairly typical sort of model, and all that data is rolling up in a fairly conventional way to produce statistics and all that sort of thing. So I've updated my plan. I'm just going to save, close, check it back in. Now as I check that file back in, because it's on that list of important managed data sources, that data will be read into the database. So when I come here to look at my project tasks for me for this project, I see it's now including the Malk's new resource task in that list. This is a fairly typical team member view. Team members are generally not interested in seeing everything. They just want to see things on the project that are relevant to them. Not the 200 tasks on the plan, but just the 10 that I'm involved in. So that's what this view here is doing. But if I went to all my tasks, I now see every single task across the entire system that's allocated to me, and I can see a number of those here, and here's the new one we just added already, plus some other things I'm supposed to be doing in the future and things I'm supposed to have been doing already in the background. Everything from across the entire system that I'm supposed to have been involved in. I can see which projects they've come from, and other information about them. I can click in and find out who else is working on them, what the comments and descriptions are, etc. So That's all the information for me. I could, of course, see that as a task list like that, but I can also see it as a resource profile. So here's the resource demand histogram that goes with that task list for my project task. So these are just the things for me on this project. And we can see when we hover on it that that new task is picked up, Malk's new resource task, and how much time is allocated to me against each month. This is default showing months, and therefore the amount changes depending on the number of days in the month. And we can see some of the other tasks that were popping up there as I go back down through the previous months. Of course, I can do exactly the same thing and go to all my tasks, and now I see the demand, which is somewhat larger for me across all the different projects in the system, and I can see what's coming up in particular months and how that's happening going forwards, and at what point it dies off, and I've got work ahead of me for 6 months by the look of it. And I can come down here and see what all that means and what the totals are, and that every user can manage their own resource situation using this. They can always see their own data. As soon as you allocate somebody using one of their pseudonyms onto a resource activity on a plan, it will appear on their list and it will contribute to their resource chart. So that's a really simple model for users to understand. They just come in, they click on the thing, they see their resource chart. Like I say, they can change through the available ranges. Now I'm an administrator here, and therefore I've got a whole range of different other options for me. I can go and look at the project resource chart because I'm the project manager for this particular project. Normal users would just see their resource demand for the project. They wouldn't see other people's as well. In such a way. So I can see how other people are going to be involved. So Carl's working here, and Kathy's working here, and Liz is working over here, and what those totals represent. And I can go up a level further as I'm the portfolio owner and see this combination of projects. So I can see that we've got me working on a set of these projects here, and some other people. So we've got Sarah who's working on a couple of them, and Stuart's just working on one of them, just one particular task, in fact, back down here. So it allows us to pick out some of that detail, which is really useful. Obviously, we've got the month in here, and we've got those total demand levels running through the table of data as well. And obviously, our hovers work in exactly the same way as they did before. Now, here I want to pick out a couple of useful things, which are this use of square brackets in the key. So this is a key, and it's giving colours for the various resources that have been identified. When a name is shown with the square brackets like this, it means what it's showing you is the resource name that was actually put onto the resource in the plan, not the one linked to a user in the system. Now, that's particularly important because that means that won't be appearing on a particular user in the system's task list or individual resource profile because it hasn't been hooked to a user yet. So that's the same for Jane and James and Dave SM there. They're not hooked to particular users in the system. All the rest of these things, they might have said something actually slightly different on the plan, as we know with the Malk one already, but it didn't say Malcolm West, it said Malk, but it's hooked through to my user. And there's a place that we look up those things. So we can come to admin. This is an admin only feature, and it's manage resources and users. And this table shows me down the left every single resource name that's been found on a plan in the system, and then it shows me how they're hooked up here to people. So we can see anything with Malk PO, or Malcolm.West is hooked through to my user. They all happen to be versions of my name, of course, but that doesn't have to be like that. And you can use this sort of linkage. So, for example, if somebody leaves the organisation, rather than going into every single plan, finding all the resources, allocations and switching them there, you can point them through to somebody else. So we can see that the Julie resource names in plans are pointing to a user called Elvira. So maybe Julie's left and we just pointed all the tasks to another person. And so this allows you to do that diversion sort of activity here. So this is really useful. As new things come in, you'll be able to hook them to users in the system. So we could go and find the James one here, and I could link that to a user. these are currently unlinked users. If I go and show all, we can see these here. So I might actually say anything pointing at James should also come and point at me as well, like that. And we'll close that down. And then when I come back here and refresh, we'll see James disappears, but my work level has gone up because the task that was pointed at James before is now pointed at me. So these things, once they're set up, they become pretty straightforward to use. They're pretty much automatic, and this is what we're looking out for, things like square brackets displaying against resource names. And then we can tidy those things up as we go. In fact, what becomes quite common is that plan templates are saved with pre-populated resource lists that are going to match the resource lookups in the system, so that you're always picking malc rather than m.west, which wasn't one that was on the list already. So that's picking those things up and pointing them through. In terms of our analysis, of course, we've looked through a few of these levels so far. The one that's available to administrators only, or people with an administrator part privilege, is this: all tasks for selected users. So it picks me first, or picks the person that's looking at it first. And I could instead go and say, well, I'm instead interested in Juliet, for example. Or we can go and find all the demand for Juliet through the system, just like that. Or I can use this and do a search by role. So rather than just ticking on the particular users I'm interested in, we can see we've got role information, and we can tag each user with a combination of role information, whatever we want them to be, separated by semicolons. And that means I could come in here and find, for example, all the team members, or I can do compound searches if I want to. But these are all my team members, and so I can say, let's have a look at all of those, like that. And that's going to then give me the resource demand across the entire system for people who are team members. And we can see that by and large we're okay within that available line, but we've got some periods where our level takes us over that. And actually what we can do here is we can also have often when people start planning activities early for projects, they use sort of default resources. So they might say, I'm going to need 3 team members. So they put a task in for the duration of the project, and they put team on it, and they put a 300% resource, which indicates 3 team members. And so we've got a generic resource here, team, and we can see those. So these are things that are going to be happening in the project, but they've not been allocated to a particular user yet, but they're going to go in against this group of people, and therefore that's been shown up. We are going to have to point those at somebody, and we're going to have to go back into that project plan, find those activities, and point them to a real person at some point. But that's the way that's set up. We can sort of park them, so they're still being included in the overall analysis, but they're not yet being pointed at a particular user. When we've got these peaks here, we can find out what those tasks are, and we can go and look at moving that particular project forwards or backwards to fit in a little bit better. So in this particular case, that project could have had a break in the middle of it, so because we've got available capacity on either side of that, we could have started it a month or 2 months earlier, and it would have fitted in quite nicely. Even perhaps starting it a few months later would have fitted in against that as well. But those sort of decisions about priorities of project and which project you can move forwards or backwards are best taken by the management team. They can weigh up the whole circumstances. This isn't an algorithm that's going to just go away and decide the optimal thing, because it might be bumping down some really high priority project. So this is giving you the information so that you can go away and do that analysis. From here we can get that information out really easily. We can use export to grab this chart, to grab the image of the information below. We can switch to a resource table to see who these particular people were, what the amounts were, etc. That can be grabbed out as a table as well to drop into Excel or something like that. But it's giving us the information to identify where these problem areas are happening and what we might do about that. So that's the resource histogram side. Of course, in practice, turning this into useful information, we often want to do the same thing with the task list, because this is a bit more understandable for users, and all those same filters that we've just used and analysis views are available here, so you can then see that task list, and often people engage a bit better with that about shifting things backwards and forwards based on this sort of picture rather than the resource histogram picture directly. And of course you can have both of these running side by side if you want to in here. To make changes, you would of course go back and change them in the plan, but there's nothing to stop you having this information paned up and using both different views at the same time. We saw that information going into reports as well earlier, and so we can see that here. If I go and run a portfolio report, we could do the same to project reports as well. This is my program report. This is going to go away and produce a whole range of different information into a Word report for this particular set of projects. We've got 5 or 6 projects, I think, in this particular program. So that's just coming through now, and then we'll just scan down to find the relevant bit within the report itself. So we've got some general stats and risk levels and plan information, and here's our resource portfolio histogram. Looks very similar, of course, to the one we just looked at a minute ago, because it's exactly that same information that we were just looking at live, but we're getting it merged alongside, like say, overdue tasks and costs and risks and finances and benefits and all that other information, providing a holistic picture of what's going on in this particular program, trend analysis as well. So all of that poking through into the same shared endpoint. And the same sort of thing with dashboards as well. So if we go and run a dashboard, we'll get some information at the portfolio and the portfolio or program level and the project level. This one's actually set up to run quarterly, so that's the same program information, but running quarterly at that top level, and then for each particular project we're getting a monthly analysis at the bottom level here. We can see some of those are simple, some of those are a bit more sophisticated, but we can just jump around between those to find the one we want and then go and drill into a bit more detail. In fact, that's where obviously Jane is coming through from on that particular project. And so you can change the timescales on all these. These are obviously pre-configured views that we're getting here in the dashboard. But if we go back and look at our resource analysis again, and I come back and look at my project resource, as I say, these things can be edited, so I can come in here, edit view, and I'm running monthly at the moment, but I could take that to daily if I wanted to. So there's the detail, and often you'll start to get a general picture at the monthly level. Of course, a monthly picture might look fine, but it might be that we've got loads of work in the first 2 weeks and no work in the second 2 weeks, which isn't going to be very feasible in practice. So all of that looked fine earlier, but actually we did have some periods where exactly that situation is happening. Under-resourced on some days, over-resourced on other days. Within the month, that looks fine. And so you often do need to come down to this lowest level to really get a good picture of what's going on, but you might start at the sort of monthly level. And with these views, you can edit a whole combination of those. So with the quarterly one we saw earlier was running a 3-month analysis, and we can run days, weeks, months and years. We can change other options on these charts to show maximum key lengths. We can show people beyond that as an others category if we want to, size the images, and we can show these as percentages rather than hours. So hours is good because you can take that total figure away and work it out. But actually percentages is also pretty good. It's a simpler thing to be able to see that you're 100% allocated. When you're looking at a combination of people, the percentage thing is quite useful. So a number of different options you can run there, and you can also run filters actually within this as well. So if you wanted to put some filter rules on this, you could do that to include or remove certain tasks from this analysis. We're not going to look at that just now, though. So, this is, as I said at the beginning where we came in, this capability is about really easily taking that data you're accumulating on all of those plans, and you've gone to the effort of putting resources against and producing that combined, often the most valuable is the combined, but that combined resource histogram. The individual ones are really useful, but most people have got a pretty good idea and can probably cook up their own. But it's doing that hard number crunching where you're crunching it across a whole load of different projects, different file formats coming in, etc. It's doing all that hard work for you and then allowing you to filter and change all the display options around that. So that's the resourcing capability. I hope you found that a useful insight into how Project in a Box works, and that you'll be able to